A millionaire's maid gives birth to a baby that looks exactly like him, leaving everyone stunned. But when the truth comes out, her words shatter the room. It's not what you think. Who is the baby's father? Why does he bear such a striking resemblance to the man of the house? And what secrets has she been hiding all along? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. David Callahan stood motionless in the grand hallway of Callahan Manor, his eyes fixed on the imposing portrait of his brother Eric. The oil painting captured Eric's confident smile and piercing blue eyes, features that had made him the perfect heir to the family legacy. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old wood surrounded him, a constant reminder of generations of tradition. "David!" His mother's voice cut through his thoughts like a knife. "We're waiting!" He adjusted his silver cufflinks, Eric's cufflinks, and took a deep breath, running his thumb over the smooth metal surfaces that still held his brother's initials. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders, heavier with each passing day since Eric's death 6 months ago. The parlor buzzed with tension as David entered. Dark wooden panels lined the walls, and crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering. Family portraits watched from their gilded frames as he made his way across the thick Persian carpet. Evelyn Callahan sat perfectly poised in her high-backed chair, her steel-gray hair swept into an elegant knot, not a strand out of place. "Now that we're all here," Evelyn said, her tone clipped, "we need to discuss the future of the estate. The board members are expecting clear direction on several matters." David settled into a leather armchair, noting how his mother's fingers drummed against the armrest, a rare sign of agitation. The leather creaked beneath him as he shifted his weight. "What matters specifically?" "The expansion plans your brother put in motion before his—" Evelyn paused, her voice catching slightly, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the fabric of her chair. "Before his passing." The door opened quietly, and Anna Harper slipped in with a silver tea service. She moved with careful grace, her small frame and simple black uniform allowing her to blend into the background. David watched as she poured the tea with steady hands, her movements precise and practiced. The delicate aroma of Earl Grey filled the air between them. "The expansion needs to be reconsidered," Evelyn continued, accepting a cup from Anna with barely a glance. "The financial implications—" A sudden crash interrupted her words. The teacup shattered on the floor as Anna doubled over, clutching her stomach. Her face contorted in pain, and a small gasp escaped her lips. Fragments of fine china scattered across the hardwood floor, tea seeping between the boards. "Anna!" David was on his feet instantly, crossing the room in long strides. The sharp scent of spilled tea rose around them as he reached her just as her knees buckled. "I'm sorry," Anna whispered, her face pale and drawn, beads of sweat forming on her forehead. "I didn't mean to." "Never mind the tea," David said, supporting her weight. She felt incredibly light in his arms, trembling like a leaf in autumn. Her skin was clammy beneath his touch. Evelyn rose from her chair, her expression a mixture of concern and annoyance. The pearls at her throat caught the light as she stepped forward. "What is the meaning of this?" "Call Dr. Matthews," David ordered, scooping Anna into his arms. Her head lolled against his shoulder, dark hair falling across her face like a silk curtain. The estate's medical wing was a testament to the Callahan family's thoroughness, a fully equipped facility maintained for the family and staff. David carried Anna through the pristine white corridors, her shallow breathing matching his quickened pace. The antiseptic smell grew stronger with each step. Dr. Matthews met them at the entrance, his experienced eyes taking in the situation at a glance. His white coat swished as he moved quickly to help. "Put her on the bed," he directed, already pulling on latex gloves with practiced efficiency. Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by uncertainty. Her hand gripped the door frame as she watched in silence, while David gently laid Anna on the examination table. The doctor worked quickly, checking vital signs and asking brief questions that Anna answered through gritted teeth. His expression changed suddenly, eyebrows rising in surprise as understanding dawned on his weathered face. "Mr. Callahan," Dr. Matthews said, straightening up, "Ms. Harper isn't ill. She's in labor." The words hung in the air like suspended dust motes. David stared at Anna's face, seeing fear replace pain in her wide brown eyes. The steady beep of medical equipment provided a surreal backdrop to the moment. "Labor." Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper, her composure cracking. "That's impossible. She never—" She trailed off, watching as another contraction gripped Anna, causing her to curl inward with a muffled cry, her fingers clutching the starch-white sheets. Dr. Matthews moved with renewed urgency, calling for his assistant. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as medical equipment was quickly gathered. "The baby is coming now. We need to prepare immediately." David paced the sterile hallway outside the medical room, his polished shoes clicking against the tiles in an uneven rhythm. Each cry that filtered through the door made him wince. Questions tumbled through his mind like leaves in a storm. How had none of them noticed Anna's condition? How had she managed to keep working through her pregnancy? Evelyn perched on a straight-back chair, her spine rigid and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "This is completely inappropriate," she muttered, shaking her head. "A pregnant maid in our household. What will people say?" "Mother, please," David said, running a hand through his dark hair. "There are more important things right now than what people might say." The minutes stretched like hours until finally a new sound pierced the air, the sharp, healthy cry of a newborn. David stopped mid-stride, his heart pounding as he waited for news. Dr. Matthews emerged, removing his surgical mask with a tired smile. "Mother and baby are doing well," he announced. "It's a healthy boy, 7 pounds exactly." Relief flooded David's face. Despite the shocking circumstances, he couldn't help but feel concerned for Anna, who had always been kind and efficient in her duties. "You can go in now," Dr. Matthews said, holding the door open. David entered the room first, with Evelyn following close behind. The medical wing's harsh fluorescent lights had been dimmed, creating a softer atmosphere. Anna sat propped up against white pillows, her dark hair damp with perspiration. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, lay the newborn. As David approached the bed, he felt an odd sensation in his chest. The baby's face was still red and slightly squished from birth, but there was something familiar about his features. A thick shock of dark hair crowned his tiny head, and when the infant opened his eyes, David felt his breath catch. Staring back at him were eyes the exact shade of gray as his own, the distinctive Callahan gray that had marked their family for generations. Evelyn stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She drew in a sharp breath as she too noticed the resemblance. Her face, which had shown hints of sympathy, transformed into a mask of suspicion and anger. Anna's arms tightened around her son as she turned her face away, refusing to meet their questioning stares. The silence in the room grew heavy and oppressive, broken only by the baby's soft cooing sounds. "Anna," Evelyn's voice cut through the tension like ice. "You will explain yourself immediately." But Anna remained silent, her fingers gently stroking her son's cheek. Her shoulders trembled slightly, but she kept her gaze fixed on her baby, as if drawing strength from his presence. David moved closer to the bed, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. His voice, when it finally came, was barely more than a whisper, thick with confusion and growing understanding. "Why does this child look like me?" The question hung in the air between them. Anna's hands stilled their gentle movement, and she drew a shaky breath. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet they had to lean in to hear her. "It's not a coincidence." The Callahan family's drawing room, normally a sanctuary of refined comfort, crackled with tension. Heavy curtains blocked most of the afternoon sun, casting long shadows across the antique Persian rug, their elaborate patterns seeming to writhe in the dim light. Anna sat in an armchair, her baby cradled protectively in her arms, while Evelyn towered over her like a judge presiding over court, her pearl necklace catching what little light filtered through the windows. "Have you been involved with my son?" Evelyn's words sliced through the silence. Her fingers gripped the back of a leather chair, knuckles white with strain, the antique leather creaking under her grasp. Anna lifted her chin, meeting Evelyn's stern gaze despite her pallor. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the baby's blanket. "No, Mrs. Callahan, I have never been involved with David." David stood by the fireplace, his hand resting on the carved mantel, feeling the smooth wood beneath his fingers. He watched the exchange with a mixture of confusion and concern, noting how Anna's arms tightened around his supposed nephew. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. "Then explain this child's resemblance to my son," Evelyn pressed, her voice rising slightly. "Explain those Callahan eyes, those unmistakable features that have marked our family for generations." Anna's lower lip trembled, but her voice remained steady. "The baby looks like David because he looks like Eric." She paused, drawing a shaky breath, her fingers gently stroking her son's cheek. "Eric is my baby's father." The revelation landed like a thunderbolt in the quiet room. David's hand slipped from the mantel, and he turned sharply to face Anna, the blood draining from his face. Evelyn sank into the nearest chair, her usual composure cracking, the pearls at her throat shifting with her uneven breathing. "Eric and I—" Anna's eyes welled with tears as she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "We fell in love last spring. We kept it secret because we knew you wouldn't approve of him being with a maid. We thought we had time to find the right moment to tell everyone." Tears spilled onto her cheeks as she described stolen moments in the garden, quiet conversations in the library after hours, and promises whispered under starlit skies. Her voice broke when she spoke of Eric's final days before the accident that took his life, each word seeming to cost her dearly. "He never knew about the baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I found out just after we lost him." David's mind raced through memories of his brother's final months, analyzing every interaction with new scrutiny. Eric had seemed different, happier, more settled, but he'd never mentioned Anna, not once. A seed of doubt took root in his chest as he studied the sleeping infant's features, searching for truth in the tiny face. Evelyn recovered her composure, her face hardening into familiar lines of authority, the vulnerability of moments before locked away behind her stern facade. "This is a convenient story, Miss Harper, but it requires proof." She stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced precision, her movements deliberately controlled. "I'm ordering a paternity test immediately. We'll know soon enough if you're telling the truth." Anna nodded, resignation clear in her posture. "I understand, Mrs. Callahan." The baby stirred in her arms, making small sounds of discontent. Evelyn swept from the room, already reaching for her phone to make arrangements, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Anna followed slowly, carrying her precious bundle with careful steps. Her shoulders bowed, under the weight of more than just her child. David remained behind, standing alone in the drawing room, his eyes fixed on the spot where Anna had sat, remembering the tiny face that so resembled his own. Or was it Eric's? The family resemblance had always been strong between the brothers, a fact that had delighted them as children, but now cast shadows of doubt. Unease settled in his stomach as he considered Anna's story, wondering if his brother had truly kept such a significant secret from him. The portrait of Eric above the mantel seemed to watch him with knowing eyes. The baby's earlier cries echoed in his memory, stirring something deep and uncertain within him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than what Anna had revealed, layers of truth and deception yet to be unraveled. The afternoon shadows lengthened across the room, as if nature itself was drawing a veil over the family's secrets. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Eric's study as David methodically searched through his brother's belongings. The room remained exactly as Eric had left it. Neat stacks of papers, organized filing cabinets, and a pristine desk surface that reflected his brother's orderly nature. Even the pen holder stood at a perfect right angle to the desk's edge, while family photos lined the shelves in perfect symmetry. The air held a stillness that seemed to preserve every detail, down to the slight indentation in the leather chair where Eric had last sought. David pulled open another drawer, carefully lifting out folders and documents. Everything was labeled and dated with typical Eric precision. Business contracts, investment reports, personal correspondence, bank statements neatly paper-clipped together. Even the paper clips were aligned in the same direction, a detail that brought a sad smile to David's face. But nothing about Anna. Not a single note, photo, or mention of their supposed relationship. The methodical organization that had always impressed David now felt like a wall of silence, mocking his search for answers. He leaned back in Eric's leather chair, running his hands through his hair in frustration. The familiar scent of leather and old books that permeated the study usually brought him comfort. But today, it felt suffocating, almost accusatory. His eyes drifted to the family photo on the desk. Eric standing tall and confident, his trademark half-smile in place, one hand resting casually in his pocket. The brother he knew had always been direct and honest about his relationships, taking pride in his transparency with family. That same half-smile now seemed to hide secrets David never knew existed. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Anna stood in the doorway, clutching a small wooden box to her chest like a shield. Her face was pale but determined, though her knuckles were white from gripping the box so tightly. The afternoon light caught the delicate features of her face, highlighting the anxiety in her expression. "I have something you should see," she said quietly, approaching the desk. Her footsteps were nearly silent on the thick carpet as she placed the box down and opened it, revealing a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The ribbon's edges were slightly frayed, suggesting frequent handling. "These are from Eric." David's hands felt heavy as he reached for the letters, the paper crackling beneath his fingers. The paper was crisp, the handwriting seemingly his brother's familiar precise script, each stroke measured and deliberate. A faint scent of age and paper dust rose from the pages as he began to read. "My dearest Anna, every moment away from you feels like an eternity. The gardens seem colorless without your presence, and even the library has lost its charm when you're not there." The words felt foreign, almost theatrical on the page, each sentence more elaborate than the last. David's frown deepened as he continued reading, the crease between his brows growing more pronounced with each line. The words were flowery, almost theatrical, nothing like Eric's usual straightforward communication style. He remembered his brother's business letters, even his personal notes to family. Clear, concise, and practical. Each word chosen with purpose, never wasted on unnecessary flourishes. Even his Christmas cards had been models of brevity. "I dream of our future together," another letter read, "when we can finally share our love with the world. Until then, my heart beats only for you." The purple prose seemed to mock everything David knew about his brother, each sweeping declaration more unlike Eric than the last. "These aren't like him," David said finally, looking up at Anna. Her fingers twisted nervously in her skirt, creating small wrinkles in the fabric. A ray of sunlight caught the movement, drawing his attention to her trembling hands. Eric wasn't. He never wrote like this. He believed in saying exactly what he meant. "People show different sides of themselves when they're in love," Anna protested, but her voice wavered slightly, like a guitar string too loosely strung. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her discomfort evident in every movement. "He wrote these late at night, when he could be himself." David stood, the letters still in his hand, the paper crinkling softly under his tightening grip. The chair scraped against the floor, breaking the room's hushed atmosphere. "My brother was always himself. He was proud of who he was." He spread the letters across the desk, pointing to various passages with growing certainty. "These sound like they're from a romance novel. Eric would have laughed at writing something like, 'My heart beats only for you.' He would have considered it pretentious." Anna's face flushed, spreading from her neck to her cheeks, and she reached for the letters with trembling hands. The color made her look feverish in the fading light. "They're real. I swear they're real." But her eyes wouldn't meet his, darting around the room like trapped butterflies, and her voice carried a note of desperation that made David's suspicions grow stronger. The tension in the room seemed to pulse with each passing second. "What aren't you telling me, Anna?" he asked quietly, watching her carefully gather the letters, her movements jerky and uncertain. The sound of paper rustling filled the heavy silence between them. "Because whatever it is, these letters aren't helping your case. They're making me trust you less." The grand dining room of the Callahan estate felt smaller than usual, its ornate walls pressing in as tension filled the air. Evelyn sat ramrod straight at the head of the table, her fingers drumming a quiet rhythm on the polished mahogany. Her steel-gray eyes never left David's face as they waited, the weight of anticipation heavy in the room. Anna cradled her baby boy, who seemed oblivious to the gravity of the moment. His tiny hands reached up, trying to catch invisible particles in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the tall windows. The resemblance to the Callahan line was undeniable. Those gray eyes, the dark wisps of hair. It made the waiting all the more unbearable. When Jenkins, their longtime butler, entered with an envelope on a silver tray, the room grew impossibly quieter. David took the envelope with steady hands, though his heart raced beneath his composed exterior. The paper crinkled as he opened it, the sound sharp in the silence. His eyes scanned the document once, twice, 3 times. The color drained from his face. "Well?" Evelyn's voice cut through the silence like a knife. David looked up, his expression a mixture of disbelief and confusion. "The baby. He's not Eric's." He swallowed hard. "And he's not mine either." Anna's sharp intake of breath seemed to echo off the walls. The baby, sensing the shift in mood, began to fuss in her arms. "Impossible," Evelyn hissed, snatching the results from David's hands. Her eyes narrowed as she read, her face hardening with each line. "You deceived us." Her voice was deadly quiet. "You fabricated an entire story about my late son, created false letters, all for what? To worm your way into this family?" I... Anna's voice cracked as tears welled up in her eyes. The baby's cries grew louder, matching the rising tension in the room. "Mother," David started, but Evelyn cut him off with a raised hand. "No, David. This girl has played us for fools. She took advantage of our grief over Eric, manufactured evidence, and tried to pass off her child as a Callahan heir." Evelyn's voice rose with each accusation. "The resemblance? It must be some cruel coincidence." Anna's face crumpled completely, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched her son closer. The baby's wails echoed off the dining room walls, a heartbreaking soundtrack to the unfolding scene. "I trusted you," David said quietly, his words somehow cutting through both the baby's cries and Evelyn's anger. "I wanted to believe you, even when things didn't add up." Anna stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Without a word, she turned and fled from the room, her footsteps quick and uneven as she carried her crying child. David pushed back from the table, ignoring his mother's sharp call of his name. He followed Anna into the hallway, catching up to her near the grand staircase. "Anna, stop!" His voice echoed off the high ceiling. "You owe us an explanation." She paused, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Slowly she turned to face him, her tear-stained face a mask of anguish and fear. "Please," David said, softer now. "Just tell me the truth." Anna drew in a shuddering breath, looking down at her son, who had finally quieted to whimpers. When she spoke, her voice trembled like a leaf in the wind. "I lied, but not about everything." The small servants' quarters felt even tinier as Anna sat in the worn armchair by the window, holding her baby close. Tears rolled down her cheeks, falling onto her son's soft blanket. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, making the modest room feel like a sanctuary and a prison all at once. The faded wallpaper and threadbare rug seemed to mirror her own worn-down spirit. When David knocked and entered, Anna instinctively held her baby tighter, her arms forming a protective shield around the infant. His face had lost its earlier anger, replaced by something gentler, though his eyes remained determined. The way he carried himself spoke of inner turmoil, his shoulders tense beneath his well-tailored shirt. "Tell me everything," he said quietly, pulling the room's only other chair closer to her. The wooden legs scraped softly against the floor, breaking the heavy silence. Anna wiped her tears with her free hand, her voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers trembled as she spoke. "I was never with Eric. I never even spoke to him more than a few words in passing." The admission seemed to deflate her, as if the lie had been holding her up all this time. The weight of her deception hung heavy in the air between them. "Then why?" David's voice held no accusation, just a need to understand. His hands fidgeted slightly, betraying his unease. Anna looked down at her sleeping son, drawing strength from his peaceful face. His tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, unaware of the turmoil surrounding him. His name was James. He worked at a factory in town. When I told him I was pregnant, Her voice caught. He laughed, said it wasn't his problem, and left town the next day. The memory still stung fresh, like a newly opened wound. David remained silent, his hands clasped tightly in his lap as she continued. The ticking of the old clock on the wall marked each painful second. "I had nothing. No family, no savings, nowhere to go." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, leaving glistening trails. "When I applied for the position here, I was desperate. But then people started noticing how much he looked like—" She gestured vaguely toward David. "Like the Callahans. And I thought if I could make everyone believe he was Eric's." "You could ensure your son's future," David finished softly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Anna nodded, shame coloring her cheeks a deep pink. "The letters, I wrote them myself. I studied Eric's handwriting from documents in his study when I cleaned. I know it was wrong. I know I betrayed your trust. But I was so scared." Her voice cracked on the last word, raw with emotion. David stood up and paced the small space, running a hand through his hair. His expression shifted between understanding and disappointment, anger and compassion. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he moved. "I don't expect forgiveness," Anna said, her voice steadier now. "I'll pack our things and leave tonight." She clutched her son closer, as if preparing for the inevitable departure. "The resemblance," David said suddenly, turning to face her. "It's remarkable. Too remarkable to be coincidence." His eyes narrowed thoughtfully as he studied the sleeping child's features. Anna shook her head, confusion clear on her face. "I don't understand it either. I've never known any connection between James and your family." The baby stirred slightly in her arms, making soft sleeping sounds. David moved toward the door, his mind clearly working through something. "Stay here for now. I need time to think." He paused at the threshold, looking back at Anna and her son. The baby stirred in his sleep, his tiny features so familiar it was unsettling. The fading sunlight caught his dark hair, highlighting the same auburn tints that ran in the Callahan family. Without another word, David left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Through the thin walls, Anna could hear his footsteps fade down the hallway, carrying with them her last hopes of finding a safe harbor for her son. She sat there in the growing darkness, cradling her baby and wondering if she'd just destroyed their last chance at happiness. The estate's archive room smelled of aged paper and leather bindings, with an underlying hint of cedar from the shelving that lined the walls. David sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by towering stacks of photo albums and journals that threatened to topple with each careful movement. Dust motes danced in the thick beam of sunlight streaming through the high window, making him sneeze occasionally as he turned brittle pages with reverent care. "There has to be something here," he muttered, carefully opening another leather-bound album, his fingers ghosting over the delicate spine. His fingers traced over faded sepia photographs of stern-faced ancestors in Victorian dress, their stiff poses and formal attire speaking of a different era. Names and dates were carefully noted beneath each image in elegant script, the ink now brown with age. David had seen these albums countless times during his childhood, but now he studied each face with new purpose, searching intently for the familiar features he saw in Anna's baby. Hours passed as David delved deeper into the family history, the afternoon light shifting across the floor. His back ached fiercely from hunching over the records, and his eyes burned from strain. But he couldn't bring himself to stop. The mystery of the baby's resemblance gnawed at him, driving him to turn just one more page, then another. Then he saw it. In a dusty album dated 1892, tucked between pages of social announcements and family portraits, a photograph showed a young man with the unmistakable Callahan features, the same dark hair, the same storm-gray eyes that he saw in the mirror every morning. The caption, written in faded brown ink, read, "Thomas Callahan, second son of William Callahan." David's hands trembled as he read the accompanying journal entry, his heart pounding against his ribs. Thomas, his great-great-uncle, had been disowned for marrying a housemaid, their love deemed inappropriate for their social standing. They'd moved west, changing their name to Harper to escape the family's influence and judgment. Harper, Anna's surname. David's mind raced as he pieced it together, each revelation falling into place like dominoes. Anna's late husband must have been Thomas's great-grandson, carrying the Callahan genes without ever knowing his true heritage. The family connection had been buried so deep that even Anna hadn't known about it, lost to time and pride. The truth of it all hit David like a physical force, leaving him breathless. Anna's lie about Eric had inadvertently led them to uncover a long-buried branch of the family tree. A story of love that defied social boundaries and paid the ultimate price of separation and forgotten identity. In the library's hushed solitude, David sat in his father's old leather chair, its familiar creaks a comfort in the growing darkness. The photograph of Thomas Callahan sat propped against a stack of books on the desk, the young man's confident gaze seeming to look straight through the years. The family resemblance was undeniable, written in every line of his face. A century-old scandal had come full circle, bringing Anna's baby, a true Callahan after all, back to the family estate where he belonged. The morning light filtered through the study's heavy crimson curtains as David approached Evelyn, who sat perfectly poised in her usual leather armchair. Her manicured fingers tapped an impatient rhythm on the worn armrest as he carefully spread the yellowed photographs across her antique mahogany desk, each one a piece of their family's hidden past. "Mother, I need you to look at these," David said, his voice firm but gentle, carrying an undercurrent of urgency. He placed Thomas Callahan's sepia-toned photograph directly in front of her, watching her reaction closely. Evelyn's perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin line, her disapproval evident in every line of her face. "Ancient history has no bearing on our current situation, David. We have more pressing matters to attend to." "This isn't just ancient history." David pulled out the family records he discovered, their pages brittle with age. "Thomas Callahan was written out of our family tree, but his descendants continued the Harper line through generations. Anna's husband was his great-grandson. There's no denying the connection." Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her bone china teacup, the delicate pattern catching the morning light. "Irrelevant history," she muttered dismissively. But David noticed how she deliberately avoided looking at the photograph, her gaze skittering away whenever it came close. "There's more, isn't there?" David leaned forward, studying his mother's face, noting the subtle tension in her jaw. "The records show Thomas left after a scandal, but the details are suspiciously vague. What really happened, Mother?" The silence stretched between them like a living thing, broken only by the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, marking each moment of truth delayed. Finally, Evelyn set down her cup with a sharp clink that echoed in the heavy air. "It was theft," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, heavy with long-buried shame. "Thomas was accused of stealing family heirlooms, precious pieces passed down for generations. The evidence was circumstantial, but the family chose to believe it. It was easier than admitting one of our own had married beneath his station." David's heart raced as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, each revelation bringing clarity to the shadows of their past. "But he was innocent, wasn't he?" Evelyn's shoulders sagged, her carefully maintained posture crumbling like the walls she'd built around this secret. "Your grandfather found letters years later, hidden in this very study, tucked behind a loose panel. They proved Thomas's innocence beyond doubt. But by then," she trailed off, pain etching deep lines around her eyes, aging her in an instant. "By then the damage was done. The family had already cast him out, changed the records, erased him from our history as if he'd never existed. And now Anna's baby, Thomas's descendant, has found his way back to us." David spread out the family tree he'd painstakingly reconstructed, each branch telling its own story of loss and connection. This could be our chance to right that wrong, to restore the truth to our family's legacy. We can't ignore this opportunity. Evelyn stared at the documents, her trembling fingers hovering over Thomas's photograph, barely touching the surface. For the first time in years, David saw real uncertainty in her eyes, the weight of generations of secrets finally taking their toll on her rigid composure. "If we acknowledge this connection," David pressed gently, encouraged by her silence, "we could finally clear Thomas's name. We could heal this rift in our family. It's time to make things right." Evelyn closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, David saw a glimmer of tears threatening to fall. "The truth has a way of demanding to be heard," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Perhaps it's time we listen to what it's trying to tell us." David gathered the photographs and documents with reverent care, his determination growing stronger with each passing moment. The baby wasn't just an unexpected addition to their household. He was the key to unlocking a century of buried truths and healing old wounds that had festered far too long. The Callahan legacy needed to be restored, not just preserved, and David knew exactly where to begin. The path ahead would be challenging, but the promise of redemption made it worth every step. From her position near the nursery doorway, Anna watched as David cradled her son in his arms. The stern lines that usually marked his face had softened, replaced by a gentle expression she'd never seen before. Her baby reached up, tiny fingers grasping at David's tie, and to her surprise, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the window cast a warm glow around them both, making the moment feel almost magical. "He's got quite a grip," David said softly, letting the baby hold onto his finger instead. His deep voice had taken on a tender quality that made Anna's chest tighten with emotion. Anna's heart swelled with an unfamiliar feeling. Hope. Maybe her desperate lie, though wrong, had led them somewhere important after all. She stepped into the room, her footsteps quiet on the thick carpet, the familiar scent of baby powder and lavender filling her senses. David looked up, his expression turning serious, but not unkind. "Anna, we need to talk about what I found." His shoulders tensed slightly, betraying the weight of his discovery. They settled into the window seat, the baby now sleeping peacefully in his bassinet nearby. The ancient oak outside cast dancing shadows across the floor as David pulled out a worn leather folder filled with yellowed papers and photographs. The musty scent of old documents filled the air between them. "Your late husband," David began, spreading out several documents with careful, reverent movements, "was actually connected to the Callahan family through Thomas Callahan, who was cast out over a century ago." Anna's hands trembled as she picked up an old photograph, its edges worn soft with time. The man in the sepia-toned image could have been her son's twin, aged 30 years. The same distinctive chin, the same set to his eyes. How is this possible? "Thomas was falsely accused of theft," David explained, his voice gentle. He smoothed a crease in one of the papers with practiced care. "The family chose pride over truth, and an innocent man lost everything. Your husband was his great-grandson." Tears welled in Anna's eyes as she looked at her sleeping son, his tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. "I had no idea. When I made up that story about Eric, I was just desperate to protect my baby." She wiped her eyes with trembling fingers, a lump forming in her throat. "I never imagined there could actually be a connection to your family." "Sometimes the truth finds its own way of coming out," David said, gathering the documents carefully. His movements were deliberate, almost protective of these precious pieces of family history. "Your son's resemblance to our family led us to uncover this buried history. Now we have a chance to make things right." Anna straightened her shoulders, determination replacing her guilt. Her voice grew stronger as she asked, "What can I do to help?" "We need to piece together Thomas's story completely. There might be more records, more evidence of his innocence. Would you be willing to help me search?" "Of course," Anna nodded firmly, her fingers unconsciously smoothing her skirt. "I want to know everything about my husband's family, and—" She hesitated, catching her lower lip between her teeth. "I want to make up for my lie, to do something good with this second chance." David stood and walked to the bassinet, looking down at the sleeping infant. The tenderness in his expression made Anna's heart skip a beat. He placed a gentle hand on Anna's shoulder, the warmth of his touch steadying her. "We'll figure this out together. For him." Anna reached for her son, holding him close. The baby stirred slightly, settling against her chest with a contented sigh, his tiny fist curling into the fabric of her blouse. For the first time since arriving at the Callahan estate, she felt something new blooming in her heart: trust. The walls she'd built around herself began to crumble as she realized that maybe this was where they truly belonged after all. The afternoon light wrapped around them like a warm embrace, promising better days ahead. The morning sun filtered through the estate's tall windows, casting long golden shadows across the polished breakfast table as Evelyn made her announcement. "Anna and the child may stay," she declared, her voice clipped but controlled, fingers tapping once against her china teacup. "But only until this matter is resolved." David nodded slowly, watching Anna's shoulders relax slightly as she balanced her son on her hip. The baby cooed softly, his dark eyes, so remarkably Callahan, taking in the ornate dining room with its crystal chandelier and ancestral portraits lining the walls. Over the next few days, David converted the library into their research headquarters, pushing aside leather armchairs to make space for their work. Stacks of dusty records and faded newspapers covered every surface, from the massive oak desk to the window seats. Anna proved surprisingly methodical, creating detailed timelines and organizing documents with quiet efficiency, her neat handwriting filling notebook after notebook. "Look at this," she said one afternoon, brushing a strand of hair from her face as she pointed to a yellowed newspaper clipping. "There's a witness statement that contradicts the theft accusation against Thomas. It changes everything we thought we knew." David leaned closer, his arm brushing against hers as he read. The contact made them both pause for a moment, suddenly aware of their proximity, before Anna cleared her throat and continued explaining her finding, her voice slightly unsteady. As they worked together, David found himself noticing small things about Anna he'd overlooked before. The way she bit her lip when concentrating, creating a tiny crease between her brows. How she always seemed to know when he needed a fresh cup of coffee, appearing silently at his elbow with a steaming mug. The gentle way she soothed her son, while simultaneously taking notes on century-old court records. Her movements graceful and practiced. "I never thought to ask," David said during a break, watching her rock the baby with natural ease. "What's his name?" "Noah," Anna replied softly, her eyes warming with maternal pride. "After my father." The baby gurgled at the sound of his name, reaching out with tiny fingers, and David couldn't help but smile. It suits him. One evening, after a particularly long day of research that had left them all exhausted, David passed by the nursery. The door was ajar, and warm lamplight spilled into the hallway like honey. Inside, Anna was tucking Noah into his crib, humming a lullaby under her breath. Her face held such tenderness as she smoothed her son's dark hair and adjusted his blanket, her movements filled with infinite care. David stood quietly in the doorway, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not as someone who had deceived them, but as a mother who would do anything to give her child a chance at a better life. Her lie had been wrong, but her motives were pure. To protect the tiny boy who now slept peacefully in his crib, one small fist curled against his cheek. As Anna turned from the crib, she noticed David watching. A faint blush colored her cheeks, but she didn't look away, her gaze steady and somehow vulnerable. In that moment, David made a silent promise to himself. Whatever the outcome of their investigation, he would make sure Anna and Noah found the fresh start they deserved, even if he had to move mountains to make it happen. The afternoon light slanted through the library's tall windows, casting long shadows across the mountains of documents spread over every available surface. Dust motes danced in the golden beams, stirred by the gentle movement of papers. David sat hunched over a weathered leather journal, his fingers tracing the faded script as he searched for clues about his family's past. His shoulders were tense with concentration, and occasional sighs escaped his lips as he worked. The door creaked softly, and Anna slipped in with Noah nestled against her shoulder. The baby's tiny hands clutched at her blouse as his eyes wandered curiously around the book-lined room. His dark eyes seemed to take in everything, from the rich mahogany shelves to the ornate ceiling moldings above. "I thought you might want some help," Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. Though they'd been working together for days, she still carried herself with an air of uncertainty, as if expecting to be turned away at any moment. Her fingers absently smoothed Noah's soft curls as she waited for David's response. David looked up, noting the determined set of her jaw, despite her nervous demeanor. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed his own exhaustion. Actually, yes. These records from the 1950s seemed promising. He gestured to the chair beside him, pushing aside a stack of newspapers to make room. Anna settled Noah in the portable bassinet she'd brought along and joined David at the large oak table. The ancient piece of furniture creaked slightly under the weight of all the documents. As she leaned in to examine the papers, David pulled out a stack of letters bound with a faded ribbon. The pale blue silk nearly colorless with age. "Look at this," he said, spreading several yellowed pages across the table. The paper was delicate, threatening to crumble at the edges. These letters mentioned meetings between Thomas Callahan and Judge Morrison right before the theft accusation. His finger tapped a particular paragraph, leaving a slight smudge in the dust. The judge was investigating corruption in the local government at the time. Anna's eyes widened as she scanned the correspondence, her fingers hovering just above the fragile paper. "And here," she pointed to another letter, her voice growing excited, "Thomas mentions protecting those who matter most. What if he wasn't talking about himself?" David nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place like an old puzzle finally finding its form. The timing fits. The judge's investigation stopped abruptly after Thomas was accused. He shuffled through more papers, pulling out legal documents, their official seals still visible despite the years. The evidence against Thomas was flimsy at best, but nobody questioned it. Someone powerful enough to orchestrate a cover-up. "And use your family as a scapegoat," Anna finished softly. Noah cooed from his bassinet, drawing their attention momentarily. The baby's innocent sounds seemed to underscore the gravity of their discovery. David ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his gesture. A few strands fell across his forehead as he frowned at the documents. "We're getting closer, but we need more concrete evidence. These letters suggest a conspiracy, but they're not proof." Anna reached for another stack of documents, her movements more confident now. The afternoon sun caught the gold of her hair as she bent over the papers. "Thank you," she said suddenly, looking directly at David, "for trusting me with this. After everything—" David met her gaze steadily, his green eyes serious but kind. "This isn't just about trust. It's about truth, for all of us." Anna felt hope flutter in her chest, but the memory of her deception still weighed heavily. She turned back to the documents, determined to help uncover the truth that had been buried for so long. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time as they worked together in the warm afternoon light. The old pickup truck rattled down Main Street of Millbrook, a town that time seemed to have forgotten. Faded storefronts with peeling paint lined the narrow street, their windows displaying merchandise that could have been there for decades. Cobwebs gathered in corners, and dust settled on mannequins wearing outdated fashions. David parked in front of a small diner, its neon open sign flickering weakly in the late morning sun, the faded red awning above sagging slightly in the middle. Anna adjusted Noah in his carrier, making sure the spring breeze wouldn't bother him. She tucked the soft blue blanket more securely around his tiny form, smiling as he snuffled in his sleep. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the importance of their journey. His tiny fingers curled into fists. "Margaret Turner lives just around the corner," David said, checking the address he'd scribbled on a notepad. His fingers drummed nervously against the steering wheel. "She's expecting us." They walked down the cracked sidewalk, past empty shops and quiet houses. Dandelions pushed through the concrete, nature slowly reclaiming its territory. A wind chime tinkled softly from a nearby porch, the only sound breaking the stillness of the sleepy town. The scent of lilacs drifted from an overgrown garden. Margaret's house was a modest white cottage with blue shutters and a well-tended garden, bright with spring flowers and carefully trimmed bushes. The elderly woman who answered their knock had kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her weathered face creasing into a welcoming smile. She smiled warmly, ushering them inside with gentle insistence. "I've been waiting for someone to ask about Thomas Callahan for years," Margaret said, settling into a floral armchair that had clearly been her favorite spot for decades. Her living room was filled with photographs, each frame telling its own story of times long past, memories preserved behind dusty glass. David leaned forward in his seat, his hands clasped tightly together. "What can you tell us about him?" Margaret's eyes grew distant with memory, her fingers absently smoothing her cotton skirt. Thomas was a good man. Everyone in town knew it. That's why the theft accusation was so shocking. She shook her head sadly, her voice growing softer. "He worked at the courthouse, you know. Always talking about doing what was right. Always standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves." Anna cradled Noah closer as Margaret continued, the baby's warm weight providing comfort. "The day they accused him, he came to my father's house. He was beside himself, saying he'd discovered something that could hurt powerful people. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his coffee cup. The next morning, the police were at his door." "Did he ever say what he found?" David asked, his voice tight with anticipation. "No, but—" Margaret stood slowly and walked to an old secretary desk, its dark wood gleaming with years of care. She pulled out a worn envelope, handling it as if it were made of delicate glass. "I've kept this safe all these years." Inside was a photograph, its edges softened with age, the sepia tones lending it a timeless quality. It showed a man holding a baby, his face proud and gentle. David's breath caught. The man's features were startlingly similar to Noah, like looking at a mirror through time. "That's Thomas with his son, taken just weeks before everything fell apart," Margaret explained, her voice thick with emotion. "They left town after the scandal. His wife couldn't handle the shame. Poor woman never recovered her spirits." David studied the photograph, noting the same gray eyes and dark hair that had caused such upheaval at the estate. The truth of their connection was undeniable, written in every line of Thomas's face. On the drive back, the setting sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the countryside. Anna wiped tears from her cheeks as she looked at David, her heart full of gratitude and hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I know I was wrong about Eric, but finding out about Thomas and this part of the family's history, it feels like Noah and I might finally belong somewhere real. David kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel as he silently agreed, the truck carrying them toward home and whatever revelations awaited them there. The evening shadows stretched across the drawing room's elegant furnishings as Evelyn stormed in, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. David stood by the fireplace, his hand resting on the mantel where generations of Callahan family photos were displayed. "What do you think you're doing?" Evelyn's voice cut through the quiet room. "Running around town, digging up ancient history with that girl and her child?" David turned to face his mother, his jaw set firmly. "I'm searching for the truth, Mother. Thomas Callahan was wrongly accused, and his story deserves to be told." "The Callahan name means something in this town," Evelyn snapped, her perfectly manicured hands clenching into fists. "We've worked for generations to maintain our reputation, and now you want to drag us through the mud?" "Our reputation?" David's voice rose slightly. "What about justice? What about doing what's right?" Evelyn paced the room, her silk dress rustling with each step. "You have no idea what you're meddling with. This isn't some simple family mystery you can solve like one of your puzzles." "Then tell me what it is," David challenged. "What are you so afraid of?" Evelyn stopped abruptly, her face paling slightly. For a brief moment, her carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing something David had rarely seen in his mother's eyes: fear. "Some things," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "are better left buried." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Without another word, Evelyn turned and walked out of the room, leaving David alone with his thoughts. He could hear Anna's soft footsteps in the hallway outside, where she had been listening to the exchange. David remained by the fireplace, his resolve strengthening with each passing second. In the doorway, Anna stood quietly, holding Noah close to her chest. Her eyes met David's, and without speaking, they both understood. They would see this through together, whatever the cost. The library had become their sanctuary in the late hours. Anna sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of leather-bound journals and faded photographs. Little Noah slept peacefully in a makeshift bed of blankets beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. "Listen to this," Anna said softly, careful not to wake her son. She held up a journal dated 1932. Thomas Callahan wrote about his hopes for his children, the way he describes his dreams for them. It's heartbreaking, knowing what happened later. David looked up from his desk where he'd been cataloging items for the exhibit. The warm lamplight cast a gentle glow across Anna's face as she read, her finger tracing the delicate handwriting. "He was a good man," David said, moving to sit beside her on the floor. "The more we uncover, the clearer that becomes." Anna nodded, gently closing the journal. It's strange how lives can change so quickly. One moment you think you know your path, and the next. She glanced at Noah, her eyes softening. "Tell me about your dreams for him," David said, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. Anna was quiet for a moment, absently straightening the blanket covering Noah. "I want him to feel secure, to never doubt his place in the world. I spent so long feeling lost, making desperate choices." She met David's eyes. "I want him to have roots, to know who he is." David watched as she tenderly brushed Noah's dark hair from his forehead. Her dedication to her son, even in the midst of her mistakes, had slowly earned his respect. He saw now what he'd missed before: her quiet strength, her sharp mind as she pieced together historical details, her unwavering focus on creating a better future. The exhibit could help with that, David said, gesturing to their research. By acknowledging Thomas's branch of the family, we're not just correcting a historical wrong. We're creating a foundation for Noah's future. Anna reached for another stack of papers, but her hands trembled slightly. Sometimes I wonder if I deserve this chance. After what I did, lying about Eric. You were protecting your son, David said. Yes, your method was wrong, but your intention... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I understand it better now. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, organizing documents and photographs for the exhibit. Anna's methodical approach impressed David. She had an eye for detail and a talent for arranging information in compelling ways. As they reviewed their findings, spread out before them like pieces of a complex puzzle, David turned to Annie. This could change everything, for both of us. Anna looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears of gratitude. The weight of his words hung in the air between them, filled with unspoken understanding and possibility. Richard Holmes's office at the local university was a testament to his life's work. Towering bookshelves lined the walls, and his desk disappeared under stacks of historical documents and family records. His round glasses caught the afternoon light as he examined the Callahan papers David had brought him. This is fascinating, Richard said, carefully turning the pages of a yellow document. The signatures here, they don't match the ones from earlier records. David leaned forward in his chair, while Anna sat beside him, holding Noah. What does that mean? David asked. Richard pulled out a magnifying glass. Look at these letters closely. The handwriting changes subtly in the documents dated after the scandal. It's as if someone else was trying to imitate the original signature. Anna shifted Noah to her other arm, peering at the papers. So the documents that accused Thomas Callahan were forged? Precisely, Richard said, his eyes lighting up with the thrill of discovery. And there's more. The timing of these accusations coincides with a major land acquisition by the Sterling Corporation. They bought up huge parcels of property that originally belonged to Thomas's branch of the family. David's jaw tightened. The Sterlings. They've been family friends for generations.
Richard nodded gravely. They're still one of the most influential families in the state. Their corporation holds significant power in local politics.
As they dug deeper into the records, Richard uncovered more inconsistencies. Bank statements showed suspicious transfers. Witness statements contained contradictions. The pieces formed a disturbing picture of deliberate deception. Someone orchestrated this entire scandal, Richard explained, spreading the evidence across his desk. They needed Thomas discredited and his family disinherited to clear the way for their business dealings. Anna hugged Noah closer. And the Sterlings benefited from all of it? The timing is too perfect to be coincidental, Richard replied. Within months of Thomas's disgrace, the Sterling Corporation acquired valuable properties at fraction of their worth, properties that would have gone to Thomas's children. David stood and walked to the window, his reflection troubled in the glass. If we expose this, we'll be going up against one of the most powerful families in the region. The Sterlings won't take this quietly, Richard warned. They've built their empire on these stolen foundations. Anna watched David's internal struggle play across his face. What do you want to do? She asked softly. David turned back to face them, his expression resolute. We owe it to them and to ourselves. The morning sun cast long shadows through the estate's windows as Evelyn sat in her favorite armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Gregory Black's unexpected visit had disrupted her usual routine, and his presence filled the room with an uncomfortable tension. The antique grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds, each sound echoing like a hammer against her nerves. "My dear Evelyn," Gregory said, his silver hair catching the light as he leaned forward in the leather wingback chair. "I've heard troubling rumors about David's activities." His voice was smooth as honey, but there was an edge beneath the sweetness that made her skin crawl. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her delicate bone china teacup, her knuckles turning white. "David is merely exploring family history." She struggled to keep her voice steady, aware of how much depended on maintaining her composure. Gregory's smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained cold and calculating. "We both know it's more than that. Some stories are better left in the past. Some people won't appreciate having their names dragged through the mud after all these years." He drummed his manicured fingers against the armrest, each tap a subtle reminder of his influence. "What people, Gregory?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though her chin lifted slightly in defiance. "Powerful people. People who remember the old days." He stood, straightening his expensive suit with practiced precision. It would be a shame if David's curiosity led to unfortunate consequences. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Across town, Anna pushed Noah's stroller through the busy market, picking up fresh vegetables for dinner. The baby cooed happily, reaching for colorful displays of apples and oranges. But Anna couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder for the third time, her heart skipping when she caught sight of a man in a dark coat quickly turning away. Her heart racing, she hurried through her shopping, clutching her grocery bags close. The man appeared again near the bakery, pretending to read a newspaper, though his eyes never moved across the page. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a face that seemed purposefully forgettable, like a shadow given human form. That evening, Anna found David in his study, surrounded by stacks of old documents and leather-bound books. "Someone was following me today," she said, bouncing Noah gently in her arms as he fussed. "A man I've never seen before." Her voice quivered slightly, with barely contained fear. David barely looked up from his papers, his desk lamp casting a warm glow over the scattered documents. "It's a small town, Anna. People are naturally curious about newcomers." He shuffled through another stack of papers, distraction evident in his tone. "This felt different," she insisted, stepping closer to his desk. "He was watching Noah, too." She hugged the baby tighter, as if to shield him from unseen threats. David's expression softened slightly at her obvious distress, but he remained focused on his work, his pen scratching against paper. "Try not to worry. We're making progress with the investigation, and that's what matters." But later that night, as David prepared to leave his office, the old floorboards creaking under his feet, he noticed an envelope that had been slipped under the door. Inside was a single sheet of expensive paper, the kind used in exclusive stationery shops. The message was brief but clear. "The past holds dangers you can't imagine. Stop now while you still can." David's hands trembled slightly as he read the words again, the paper rustling in his grip. The threat was unmistakable, and suddenly Anna's concerns about the stranger in the market took on a more sinister meaning. He glanced at the darkened window, wondering how many other shadows held secrets waiting to be revealed. David sat at his desk, the threatening letter lying between him and Anna. The paper seemed to pulse with menace in the warm lamplight of his study, its stark white surface made somehow more sinister by the crisp black typewritten words. Anna stood behind Noah, his portable crib, her hands protectively gripping its edges until her knuckles turned white. "Stop your investigation or face the consequences," David read aloud, his voice tight with controlled anger. "It's not even signed. Just another coward hiding in the shadows." Anna's face paled as she reached down to stroke Noah's dark hair, her fingers trembling slightly against his soft curls. "David, maybe we should think about this. These people, they sound dangerous. We don't know what they're capable of." We can't let them scare us off, David said, but his eyes lingered on the Noah, his sleeping form, watching the gentle rise and fall of the baby's chest. Not when we're so close to the truth about what happened all those years ago. But at what cost? Anna's voice cracked with emotion. I started all this with a lie, and now it might put everyone in danger. Your family, my son. She trailed off, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. David stood and walked to the window, checking the grounds out of habit. The estate's manicured lawn stretched into darkness, broken only by security lights that cast long shadows across the perfectly maintained gardens. A cool breeze rustled through the ancient oak trees that lined the property. I've already called Richard. He's helping me secure all our evidence in multiple locations. If anything happens to one set of documents, we'll have backups. He's been invaluable throughout this whole process. That's not enough, Anna whispered, her words heavy with fear. These people, whoever they are, they've had decades to hide their secrets. They won't stop at destroying papers. We've seen how far they'll go to protect themselves. David turned back to face her, his expression resolute despite the worry lines creasing his forehead. I'm planning to make a public announcement about our findings. Once the truth is out there, it can't be buried again. Too many people have suffered for too long. Anna picked up Noah, Zrinya, who stirred slightly, before settling against her shoulder, his warm weight both comfort and concern. When? Next week. Richard's helping me organize it. The more public attention we get, the safer we'll be. He walked over to them, his hand gentle on Noah's back, feeling the baby's steady breathing. Until then, I want you both to stay here at the estate. We have security, and the house is safer than your apartment in town. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to either of you. Anna nodded slowly, torn between gratitude for his protection and guilt over the lie that had started everything. Her eyes followed David as he returned to his desk, already making notes for the announcement, his shoulders set with determination. His unwavering commitment to right a historical wrong, even in the face of threats, touched something deep inside her. Thank you, she said softly, meaning more than protection, for not giving up on this, on us. David met her gaze across the room with piercing intensity. We're in this together now. I made that choice when I decided to trust you. His trust made Anna's heart ache with mingled joy and fear. She held the Noah closer, breathing in his scent, hoping they'd chosen right in staying. The night pressed against the windows, but David's study felt like sanctuary. The crackling fireplace cast dancing shadows across the study walls as Anna sat in one of the leather armchairs, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. David occupied the chair opposite her, both of them seeking comfort in the room's warmth against the evening chill. Sometimes I wonder what Thomas would think of all this, Anna said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. David leaned forward slightly, his expression encouraging her to continue. When I told him about the baby, he just left. No explanation, no goodbye. Just emptied our bank account and disappeared. Anna's voice trembled. I kept thinking I must have done something wrong, that somehow I wasn't enough. You didn't do anything wrong, David said firmly. His choices were his own. Anna wiped away a stray tear. I felt so lost after that, like I was drifting without an anchor. That's why She trailed off, the weight of her lie about Eric still heavy between them. Why did you create the story about Eric? David finished gently. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Anna had come to recognize as a sign of his own vulnerability. I understand feeling lost. Ever since Eric died, I felt like I'm trying to fill shoes that are too big. What do you mean? Eric was the natural leader, charismatic, confident, born for this role. I was always the quiet one, happy to stay in the background. David's voice grew quiet. Sometimes I look at this estate, at all the responsibilities, and I'm terrified I'll fail, that I'll let everyone down. Noah began to fuss in his portable crib, and Anna moved to get him, but David stood first. "May I?" he asked. Anna nodded, watching as David carefully lifted her son. The baby settled immediately in his arms, tiny fingers curling around David's thumb. "You're not failing anyone," Anna said, watching them both. "You're facing things Eric never had to deal with. You're trying to right old wrongs, to make things better. That takes real courage." David looked down at Noah, who was watching him with those striking gray eyes. "Sometimes I think you're the brave one," he said. "Starting over, protecting your son, facing everything alone." "I'm not alone anymore, though, am I?" Anna said softly. David settled back into his chair, still holding Noah. The firelight softened his features as he looked at her. "You're stronger than you realize," he told her, his voice warm with admiration. Anna felt her heart flutter at his words, at the way he held her son with such natural care. She looked at him with gratitude, feeling something deeper than trust beginning to bloom in her chest. The affection in his eyes made her feel, for the first time in a long while, that maybe she wasn't lost anymore. Richard's hands trembled as he held the yellowed letter, his eyes scanning the damning words again and again. The afternoon sun streamed through the library windows, illuminating decades-old secrets finally brought to light. "David needs to see this immediately," he muttered, reaching for his phone. Within the hour, David stood in the library, his face growing pale, as he read Gregory Black's carefully crafted instructions for discrediting the forgotten Callahan branch. Each word revealed the calculated manipulation that had destroyed innocent lives for profit. "And my mother," David's voice cracked as he reached the section detailing Evelyn's involvement. "It appears she was given little choice," Richard said gently. "The letter suggests Gregory threatened to expose other family secrets if she didn't cooperate." David found Evelyn in her sitting room, her usual rigid posture absent as she gazed out the window. When he placed the letter on the table beside her, she didn't need to read it to know what it contained. Her shoulders slumped. "How long have you known?" David asked, his voice tight with emotion. "Since the beginning." Evelyn's words came out barely above a whisper. "Gregory approached me after your father died. He had evidence of financial improprieties that would have destroyed us. Said he could make it all go away if I helped him discredit the other branch." "So you chose to sacrifice innocent people to protect our reputation?" Evelyn turned to face him, tears gathering in her eyes. "I thought I was protecting our family. I was wrong, David. So terribly wrong." She reached for his hand, and for once he didn't pull away. "You're different than I was, stronger. You have the chance to fix what I couldn't." David stood in silence, processing his mother's confession. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, but for the first time, it felt like something he could bear. Later that evening, he found Anna in the nursery, singing softly to her son. The sight of them together brought clarity to his decision. "We found proof," he said quietly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful scene. "Gregory Black orchestrated everything. My mother—" He paused, still processing the revelation. "She was involved too, but under duress." Anna cradled her baby closer. "What happens now?" "We have to go public with everything. The scandal, the cover-up, Gregory's manipulation." David's voice grew firm with conviction. "This is bigger than us now. It's about justice for everyone who was wronged." Anna nodded, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. The baby stirred in her arms. his innocent face reminding them both of why the truth mattered so much. "This is bigger than us now," David repeated, his determination evident in every word. The morning sun cast long shadows through the estate's windows as David, Anna, and Richard gathered in the library. Stacks of documents and photographs covered the massive oak table, each piece telling part of the story they would soon share with the world. Anna sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through old newspaper clippings while her baby napped peacefully in a bassinet nearby. Her hands moved with careful precision, but her mind felt oddly calm. After weeks of fear and uncertainty, the truth would finally come to light. "These should be displayed first," Richard said, holding up the documents that proved Gregory Black's deception. "They tell the clearest story." His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades uncovering hidden truths. David nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his lack of sleep, but determination burned bright in his expression. He paused in his work, watching Anna methodically arrange the evidence. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said softly. Anna looked up, surprised by the sudden admission. A warm smile spread across her face as she met his gaze. "I never thought my lie would lead to uncovering the truth," she said, her voice tinged with irony. David crossed the room and knelt beside her. "You helped me see beyond our family's facade, made me question things I'd accepted my whole life." The baby stirred in his bassinet, making tiny cooing sounds. Anna reached over to adjust his blanket, her heart full. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she felt truly at peace. This wasn't just about clearing her conscience anymore. It was about justice, truth, and finding somewhere she and her son could belong. Richard cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the task at hand. "The press will arrive at 2. We should review our presentation one more time." They worked steadily through the morning, arranging documents and photographs in the grand hall where the announcement would take place. Each piece of evidence told part of the story: the false accusations, the forged documents, the lives destroyed by greed and fear. Evelyn appeared briefly in the doorway, watching their preparations with a mixture of regret and relief on her face. She didn't speak, but her presence felt like silent approval of what they were about to do. Anna caught glimpses of movement outside the tall windows, security guards patrolling the grounds, a precaution David had insisted on. The morning light created strange patterns as it filtered through the trees, casting shifting shadows across the manicured lawn. As they finalized the last details, Anna felt a deep sense of rightness settle over her. Whatever came next, she knew they were doing the right thing. The truth would finally be told, and perhaps in telling it, both she and the Callahan family could find redemption. The shadows outside grew longer as noon approached, dancing across the estate's grounds like silent witnesses to the history about to be revealed. Unknown to those inside, these shadows concealed more than just the play of light and darkness. The grand ballroom of the Callahan estate hummed with anticipation. Reporters clutched their notepads while historians leaned forward in their chairs, eager to capture every detail. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting warm patches across the polished wooden floor and illuminating the gathered crowd. David stood at the podium, his hands resting firmly on its edges. His dark suit and composed demeanor projected confidence, though those who knew him well might notice the slight tension in his jaw. He glanced toward the back of the room where Anna stood, her baby nestled against her chest. She gave him a small, encouraging nod. The empty chair beside the podium seemed to draw attention to Evelyn's absence. Several guests whispered among themselves, noting the family matriarch's missing presence. "Thank you all for coming," David began, his voice clear and steady. "Today, we're here to correct a historic wrong, one that has affected not just the Callahan family, but the very foundation of truth itself." He lifted a weathered photograph, showing it to the crowd. "This is Thomas Callahan, a man whose story was deliberately erased from our family's history. He was accused of crimes he didn't commit, stripped of his inheritance, and cast out of this very house." The audience shifted in their seats as David methodically presented the evidence. He showed the forged documents, explained the web of lies, and revealed how greed had motivated the destruction of an innocent man's life. "The truth," David continued, "is that Thomas Callahan was the victim of a calculated scheme. We have uncovered irrefutable proof that the accusations against him were fabricated to serve the interests of powerful men who sought to control the family's fortune." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. An elderly woman in the front row dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Anna watched from her position near the back, pride swelling in her chest. Her baby made a soft sound, and she gently bounced him, keeping her movements quiet. David's voice carried across the room, strong and unwavering, as he spoke of accountability and the importance of acknowledging past wrongs. "The Callahan family commits itself to making this right," David declared. "We will restore Thomas's rightful place in our family's history and ensure that the truth is known." As the crowd responded with approving nods and quiet applause, Anna's attention was drawn to movement near the side entrance. A man in a dark suit stood partially hidden behind a column. He seemed oddly familiar, the same stranger she'd noticed in town. Their eyes met briefly, and a chill ran down her spine. The man's gaze shifted deliberately to her baby, and he made a subtle gesture with his hand. Anna's arms tightened instinctively around her son. Without drawing attention to herself, she began moving toward the door that led to the staff quarters, her heart pounding against her ribs. She kept her pace measured and calm, though every instinct screamed at her to run. The baby seemed to sense her tension, squirming slightly in her arms. She whispered soothing words as she reached the door, slipping through it as David's voice continued to fill the ballroom behind her. The phone's shrill ring pierced the evening quiet of David's study. He picked it up, his mind still processing the day's events. "Mr. Callahan," a voice said, smooth and cold as ice, "I trust you understand the gravity of your actions today." David's grip tightened on the receiver. "Who is this?" "Someone who strongly suggests you retract your announcement immediately." The voice paused. "The consequences of refusing would be unfortunate." David's jaw clenched. "Is that a threat?" "Consider it friendly advice." The line went dead. In the staff quarters, Anna was putting her baby to sleep when she heard scratching sounds outside her door. Her heart jumped. The baby stirred in his crib as she crept toward the entrance. The corridor was empty, but a white envelope had been pinned to her door. With trembling fingers, she pulled it free. Inside was a single photograph, her and her baby at the market last week. Red ink crossed out their faces. On the back, written in precise handwriting, "Silence is safety." Anna's hands shook as she closed and locked her door. She pulled her son from his crib, holding him close as tears welled in her eyes. Across the estate, David burst into the sitting room where Evelyn sat reading. "Is Gregory behind this?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. Evelyn looked up, her face pale. "David, please." "Tell me the truth, Mother, for once." She set her book aside, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Gregory Black has always been protective of his interests." "You mean dangerous?" "Yes," she whispered. "He's dangerous." which is why you need to stop this nonsense before someone gets hurt." "Nonsense?" David's voice rose. "An innocent man's life was destroyed. Our family's honor was compromised. And you want me to ignore that?" "I want you to be safe," Evelyn pleaded. "Gregory won't hesitate to—" She stopped herself, looking away. "To what, Mother? What exactly is he capable of? Please, David, drop this investigation for your own good." David shook his head. "I can't do that. I won't." As darkness settled over the estate, David made his way to Anna's quarters. He knocked softly, hearing her startled movement inside before she opened the door. "Are you all right?" he asked, noting her red-rimmed eyes. Anna showed him the photograph. David's expression hardened as he studied it. "I won't let anything happen to either of you," he said firmly, though worry lined his face. Through the window, shadows moved across the moonlit lawn. Anna clutched her baby closer, and David's hand instinctively moved to rest protectively on her shoulder. "Maybe we should leave," Anna whispered. "No," David said. "We finish this. Together." But even as he spoke the words, his eyes tracked the moving shadows outside, knowing the threat was no longer just a possibility. It was here. David gathered his most trusted allies in the estate's private study. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the antique desk where they sat. Anna held her sleeping baby, while Richard Holmes spread out documents across the polished surface. Elijah Morton, their lawyer, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses as he reviewed the evidence. "We need to make this information public in a way that leaves no room for doubt," David said, his voice firm. "And we need to ensure everyone's safety." Richard nodded, gesturing to the papers before them. "I've contacted several respected journalists who specialize in investigative reporting. They're ready to break the story simultaneously." "Multiple sources mean Gregory can't suppress the information," Elijah added. "Once it's out there for good." Anna shifted her baby gently in her arms. "What about the other families?" she asked softly. "The ones who were affected by the original scandal?" David turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "What are you suggesting?" "The descendants of the forgotten branch. They deserve to tell their story, too. Their voices would make the truth undeniable." Richard's eyes lit up. "She's right. Personal testimony would resonate with the public far more than just documents and legal papers." They spent the next hour crafting their strategy. Elijah would coordinate with the journalists while Richard reached out to the affected families. David would prepare a formal statement, and Anna would help organize the testimonies. When they executed their plan 3 days later, the impact was immediate. News outlets across the country carried the story. Social media exploded with support for the Callahan family's courage in facing their past. Gregory Black's carefully constructed facade crumbled as evidence of his manipulation and fraud came to light. In her private sitting room, Evelyn watched the coverage on television. Her hands trembled as she saw David addressing reporters, his voice steady and clear as he detailed the truth about their family's history. For the first time, she saw not her younger son standing in his brother's shadow, but a leader in his own right. Later that evening, David found Anna in his study. She stood by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Her baby slept peacefully in a bassinet nearby. "We did it," David said quietly, moving to stand beside her. Anna turned to him, a gentle smile lighting her face. For the first time in years, she felt truly purposeful, like she'd contributed to something meaningful. The weight of her past deceptions had lifted, replaced by the lightness of redemption. David looked at her with warmth in his eyes. "Thank you for suggesting we involve the other families. Their stories made all the difference." Anna nodded, glancing at her sleeping son. Everyone deserves a chance to be heard, she said softly, to have their truth acknowledged. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky, both feeling the profound sense of peace that comes with setting things right. In the warm light of morning, David stood in his office, watching as Anna nervously settled into one of the leather chairs across from his desk. Her fingers twisted in her lap, a habit he'd noticed whenever she felt uncertain. "I have a proposition for you," David said, his voice gentle but firm. "The estate needs someone to lead our new family outreach programs, someone who understands what it means to seek belonging and acceptance." Anna's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just—" She trailed off, catching herself before saying, "Just a maid." "You're exactly who we need," David continued. "You understand struggle, redemption, and the importance of family connections. Those aren't just words to you. They're lived experience." Color rose in Anna's cheeks as she considered his words. Her baby slept peacefully in a bassinet nearby, a reminder of everything that had led to this moment. The role would involve creating support systems for the descendants of the forgotten branch, David explained. Many of them have struggled with their identity and place in society. You could help change that. Anna sat quietly for a moment, her mind racing with possibilities. She thought about all the nights she'd spent feeling lost and alone, wishing someone had been there to help guide her way. I'd like to try," she finally said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I think I could make a real difference." Over the next few weeks, Anna threw herself into her new role. She transformed a dusty corner of the estate into a welcoming office space, filling it with family histories and resources. She reached out to community organizations, arranged meetings with distant relatives, and developed programs to help families reconnect with their heritage. The estate staff, who had once viewed her with suspicion, now sought her advice and assistance. Her quiet efficiency and genuine compassion earned their respect. Even Evelyn began to acknowledge her contributions with brief nods of approval. During a particularly busy afternoon, David paused in the doorway of Anna's office. She sat at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, talking animatedly about a new mentorship program she was developing. Her free hand gestured expressively as she spoke, and her face glowed with enthusiasm. Gone was the timid maid who had once slipped silently through the halls. In her place was a confident woman who knew her worth and her purpose. David felt a surge of admiration as he watched her work, mixed with something deeper that made his heart beat a little faster. Anna finished her call and looked up, catching his eye. She smiled warmly, and David realized how much she had changed not just the family, but him as well. Her strength and resilience had shown him what true leadership looked like. Not just giving orders, but lifting others up and helping them find their way. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the estate's garden as Anna walked along the rose-lined path, her baby cooing softly in her arms. The autumn air carried the sweet scent of late-blooming flowers, and fallen leaves crunched beneath her feet. She spotted Evelyn standing near the stone fountain, her normally rigid posture somehow softer in the golden light. Anna's first instinct was to turn away, but something in Evelyn's expression made her pause. "Anna," Evelyn called out, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. "Would you join me for a moment?" Anna approached cautiously, adjusting her hold on the baby. To her surprise, Evelyn's eyes were rimmed with unshed tears. "I've been wrong about you," Evelyn began, her voice trembling with emotion. She reached out to steady herself against the fountain's edge. "So terribly wrong." Anna stood perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. She'd never seen Evelyn like this before. Vulnerable, almost fragile. What you did, Evelyn continued, helping David uncover the truth, facing those threats. You showed more courage than I ever did. I chose to hide the truth, to protect what I thought was our family's honor. She shook her head slowly. But you and David, you actually restored it. The baby gurgled, reaching out toward Evelyn with tiny fingers. Evelyn's eyes softened as she looked at him. I need to apologize, she said, meeting Anna's gaze. Not just for how I treated you, but for doubting your intentions. You protected my grandson even when we gave you every reason not to trust us. Anna swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment. I made mistakes too, she admitted quietly. The lie about Eric was born of desperation to protect your child, Evelyn finished. As a mother, I should have understood that better than anyone. Though Anna appreciated the apology, years of Evelyn's cold treatment couldn't be erased in a single moment. She found herself studying the older woman's face, looking for any sign of insincerity. Evelyn seemed to sense her hesitation. I don't expect you to trust me immediately, she said. I know I need to earn that. The baby chose that moment to let out a happy squeal, breaking the tension. Both women smiled despite themselves. Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the child. May I? She asked, reaching out tentatively. Anna nodded, and Evelyn leaned down to place a gentle kiss on the baby's forehead. You're part of this family now, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Both of you. Standing there in the garden, Anna felt something shift inside her, like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. The words she'd longed to hear since arriving at the estate had finally been spoken, not by David or the staff, but by the one person whose acceptance had seemed impossible to earn. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of the Callahan Estate's main conference room, casting warm patterns across the polished oak table. David stood at the head, his presence commanding yet approachable. Family members filed in. Anna entered last, clutching a notebook to her chest, her steps hesitant despite her new position. Please, Anna, David gestured to an empty chair near him. Join us. Several pairs of eyes followed her movement, some curious, others still wary. Evelyn, sitting opposite, gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. David cleared his throat. I've called this meeting to discuss the future of our estate, he began, his voice steady and clear. Recent events have shown us that the Callahan legacy isn't just about preserving wealth. It's about making things right. He unfolded a detailed proposal, laying out plans for community engagement and historical preservation. We have resources that can make a real difference, he continued. I propose we establish a foundation dedicated to supporting local families and preserving the true history of all Callahan branches. Anna's heart quickened as David turned to her. Anna has developed several outreach programs that I believe will be instrumental in this effort. Anna. She rose slowly, her voice initially soft but growing stronger as she spoke. The first program would provide educational support for underprivileged children, she explained. We could use the estate's library and grounds for after-school programs. To her surprise, heads nodded in approval. Even Cousin Margaret, known for her skepticism, leaned forward with interest. The second initiative, Anna continued, gaining confidence, would establish a historical research grant, helping other families uncover and preserve their own histories. Excellent idea, Richard commented from his seat. This could prevent other families from experiencing what our forgotten branch went through. The room buzzed with positive energy as more family members contributed ideas and suggestions. David skillfully guided the discussion, ensuring everyone's voice was heard while keeping the focus on their shared goal of renewal. When the final plans were agreed upon, David stood again. This marks a new chapter for the Callahans, he declared. We're no longer just preserving a legacy. We're building a better one. The meeting concluded with a sense of unity that Anna had never witnessed before in the family. As others filed out, discussing details animatedly, David approached her. "You're as much a part of this as any Callahan," he said softly. "Don't forget that." Anna felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she simply nodded, too moved to speak. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the estate's manicured lawn as David stood by his office window. His eyes followed Anna's figure as she moved through the garden, clipboard in hand, stopping occasionally to make notes about potential spaces for the children's programs. "You're doing it again!" Richard's voice came from behind him. David turned, caught off guard. "Doing what?" Richard settled into one of the leather chairs, a knowing smile on his face. "Watching her like she's the answer to a question you haven't asked yet." David sighed and sat down across from his friend. The weight of his unspoken feelings had been growing heavier each day. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes," Richard chuckled. "You know, David, sometimes the hardest truths to face are the ones right in front of us." "She's just gotten settled into her new role," David protested weakly. "The last thing she needs is—" "What?" "Someone who believes in her. Someone who sees her for who she really is." Richard leaned forward. "You've both been through enough secrets. Maybe it's time for some honesty." David ran a hand through his hair, his usual composure slipping. "And if she doesn't feel the same way?" "Then you'll know," Richard said simply. "But from what I've seen, the way she looks at you when you're not watching, well, let's just say I wouldn't be too worried." Over the next few days, David tried to find the right moment to speak with Anna. But each time an opportunity arose, something interrupted them: a phone call, a staff member with a question, or his own hesitation. Finally, one evening as the sun began to set, David spotted Anna walking alone along the estate's tree-lined path. Her son was safely asleep under the watchful eye of Mrs. Peterson, the nanny. "Mind if I join you?" David called out softly. Anna turned, offering a warm smile that made his heart skip. "Of course not." They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments, the evening air cool and fresh around them. David noticed how the fading sunlight caught the auburn highlights in her hair. "The outreach programs are coming along wonderfully," Anna said, breaking the silence. "I never thought I'd be doing something like this." "You've exceeded everyone's expectations," David replied, "including mine." He paused, gathering his courage. "Anna, there's something I need to tell you." She stopped walking, turning to face him with curious eyes. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, and no." David took a deep breath. "These past months working together, getting to know the real you, I've realized something." He met her gaze directly. "You've become more than just a colleague to me, more than a friend." Anna's eyes widened slightly, her lips parting in surprise. The clipboard she always carried dropped to her side. "I know this might be unexpected," David continued, his voice gentle but firm. "And I understand if you don't feel the same way. But after everything we've been through, I wanted to be honest with you." A soft breeze rustled through the trees as Anna processed his words. Her cheeks had flushed pink, and David could see her hands trembling slightly. "David, she began, then paused, collecting her thoughts. I need some time to think about what this means for both of us, for my son, for everything we've built here." David nodded, his heart both lifting and sinking at her response. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Anna gave him a small, uncertain smile before turning back toward the house, leaving David standing among the lengthening shadows, hope and doubt warring in his heart. The autumn breeze rustled through the estate's gardens as guests gathered for the ceremony. Rows of white chairs filled the manicured lawn, and a podium stood before a covered bronze plaque mounted on the estate's stone wall. Descendants of the forgotten Callahan branch filled the front rows, their faces a mixture of emotion and anticipation. Anna stood near the podium, her son nestled against her shoulder. The baby's dark curls caught the sunlight, and his gray eyes, so similar to the Callahan line, watched the crowd with quiet curiosity. David adjusted his tie beside her, his usual confidence tempered by the weight of the moment. "Are you ready?" Anna whispered. David nodded, squeezing her arm gently before stepping up to the podium. The murmur of conversation died down as he cleared his throat. "For generations," he began, his voice steady and clear, "the Callahan name has stood for tradition and honor. But today, we acknowledge that honor isn't just about maintaining appearances. It's about facing hard truths and righting past wrongs." Anna watched as David's words captured the audience. His shoulders were straight, his expression earnest as he continued, "The branch of our family we honor today was cast aside due to lies and manipulation. Their story was buried, their names forgotten. But today, we restore their rightful place in our family's legacy." Several elderly members of the forgotten branch dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Anna felt her own eyes growing moist as David spoke about redemption and second chances, knowing he was speaking about her too. "Family isn't just about blood or names," David said, his gaze meeting Anna's for a moment. "It's about standing together, supporting each other, and having the courage to fight for what's right. The people we honor today never lost their dignity, their strength, or their connection to the Callahan name, even when others tried to deny it." As David unveiled the plaque, listing the names of those wrongfully cast out, applause erupted from the crowd. Anna's heart swelled with pride, watching him embrace the elderly relatives who had lived their entire lives under the shadow of false accusations. The ceremony continued with other speakers sharing stories and memories. Children of the forgotten branch played on the lawn, their laughter a testament to the healing taking place. Anna's son reached out toward David whenever he passed nearby, and David would touch the baby's hand with a gentle smile. As the formal proceedings concluded, guests mingled over refreshments. The estate's grounds buzzed with conversation and laughter. Anna watched as previously estranged relatives exchanged phone numbers and shared family photos. "Look at them all," David said, returning to Anna's side. "Finally together, as they should be." Anna nodded, adjusting her sleeping son in her arms. "You've given them back their place in the family." "We did this together," David corrected her. He took her free hand in his touch warm and reassuring. "We've come so far," he said softly. Anna squeezed his hand, a smile spreading across her face as she looked out at the unified family before them. Sunlight streamed through the windows of Anna's small quarters as she folded her son's tiny clothes. The baby sat on a blanket nearby, clutching his favorite stuffed bear and laughing at the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. The room felt different now, no longer a space that represented her deception, but rather the beginning of her journey with the Callahans. A gentle knock at the door made her look up. David stood in the doorway, his sleeves rolled up and his tie loosened. "Need an extra pair of hands?" he asked, stepping into the room. Anna smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "That would be wonderful. Thank you." David picked up an empty box and began carefully placing photo frames inside. He paused at a picture of Anna's son as a newborn. "He's grown so much since then." "He has," Anna agreed, watching as her son crawled toward David, babbling happily. Sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed. A few months ago, I was terrified about our future. David lifted the baby into his arms, a natural gesture that made Anna's heart warm. And now, she folded another tiny shirt, considering her words. Now I feel like we belong somewhere, like we have a real chance at building a life here. She met his eyes. I never expected to find this kind of acceptance, especially after. After the lie? David finished gently. Anna, you've more than made up for that. What you did to help restore our family's name, to bring justice to those who were wronged, that shows your true character. Anna moved to the window, looking out at the estate grounds where her new cottage waited. The outreach programs were developing. The families were helping reconnect. It feels like I'm finally doing something meaningful. David stepped beside her, still holding her son. You've changed us, Anna. The Callahan family was stuck in the past, buried in secrets. You helped us find our way back to what really matters. The baby reached for his mother, and as Anna took him, her hand brushed David's. The touch sent a familiar warmth through her, and she found herself unable to look away from his gentle gaze. I want you to know, David said softly, that you've earned every bit of respect you've received. This isn't charity or obligation. You belong here, both of you. Anna felt tears prick at her eyes. Thank you, David, for everything. They stood in comfortable silence, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the floor. The moment felt heavy with unspoken words and growing possibilities. David turned to her, his expression tender. He leaned in slowly and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. Whatever happens next, I'm here, he said quietly. Anna nodded, her heart full of hope and possibility as she held her son close. The evening sun cast long shadows across the estate gardens as Anna walked beside David, watching her son toddle ahead of them on unsteady legs. Pink and orange blooms lined the pathway, their sweet fragrance filling the air. The gathered crowd, estate staff, family members, and community partners, created a warm buzz of anticipation. David stepped forward to address the group, his presence commanding yet gentle. Today marks another step forward for the Callahan family, he announced, his voice carrying across the garden. We're expanding our outreach programs to help more families reconnect with their heritage and find the support they need. He gestured toward Anna, who stood tall despite the flutter of nervousness in her chest. And I'm proud to announce that Anna Harper will be taking the lead on these initiatives. Her dedication and insight have already transformed countless lives, including our own. The crowd erupted in applause, genuine warmth in their response. Anna felt her cheeks flush as she saw Evelyn nodding approvingly from the crowd. Her son clapped too, mimicking the adults around him, making several people chuckle. As the crowd dispersed, David and Anna lingered in the garden. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink, its light catching in the fountain's spray. Anna's son had dozed off in her arms, his small face peaceful against her shoulder. They found a quiet bench overlooking the rose garden, where David had first shown Anna the family records that changed everything. The memory felt distant now, like a story from another life. You were amazing today, David said softly, careful not to wake the sleeping child. Seeing you take charge of these programs, watching how naturally you connect with people, it's remarkable. Anna adjusted her son's position gently. It feels right, she admitted. Like everything that happened, even the mistakes, led us here for a reason. David turned to face her, his expression serious yet tender. Anna, he began, taking her free hand in his, these past months have shown me what truly matters. Not just in leading this family, but in life. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm ready to build a future with you, if you'll have me. Both of you. Anna's eyes welled with tears as warmth filled her chest. She squeezed David's hand back, smiling peacefully. The estate grounds stretched before them in fading sunlight. Stone walls glowing, gardens vibrant. The familiar view now felt like home. David pulled her close, and Anna leaned in, their quiet moment rich with promise. Her son slept peacefully between them, unaware of this life-changing moment. If you enjoyed the story of Anna Harper, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it